All right. How about that? So I wanted to talk today about something that I think a lot of teachers say quite regularly, which is, how does that feel? And I say it all the time. I'm a very somatically oriented teacher. I'm a very kind of embodiment oriented teacher. And so it's important to me that my clients are taking some time, my students are taking some time to think about how something feels. It's not my goal as a teacher to say, just do this. It's just not all that interesting to me to just say a blanket instruction. I'm more interested in, if I invite somebody to try something, here's my instruction, here's my cue, here's my sequence that we're going to play with. How's that working for you? What can you learn about this? How do we want to modify it for you so that you're more successful or it feels better? Right? There's just an awful lot of information that students or clients can learn from that is based on their own embodied experience, which is great if the student or the client is one of those people who feels what's happening in their body. But here's the thing, some clients, some students don't so much feel what's happening in their bodies. And so for those people, asking how does this feel is actually unbelievably frustrating. Just the question in and of itself might make them feel like they're failing at something. Or if you're joining me today and you're not a teacher, you're a mover, you're a student, maybe you're the person who doesn't feel so much so clearly in your body, and you're the person who is being frustrated by that question of how does this feel for you today? And so what are some solutions to this situation? What are some ways to make this situation, more happy for the client, the student, but also still provide that opportunity for observation? And as an added bonus, these are maybe some self-awareness skills that we can share as teachers with our students that you as the student take into your regular life. So I'm thinking about this because today is the first day for Thrive, for my small group coaching program for teachers. And the first week topic is self-awareness. And so I've been thinking about self-awareness a lot. So self-awareness comes in several different areas, arenas, forums. So we're talking quite specifically about a physical self-awareness. And if a person doesn't have an amazing sense of proprioception, of where their body is in space, doesn't have an amazing sense of interoception, of what's happening internally in terms of internal systems, what happens if we start to look outside the system? So instead of saying, how does that feel, which is a fairly general and amorphous question, can we drill down and get more specific and say, what's an example? So imagine you're doing or you're teaching just a simple arm circle. And my intent as a teacher is to say, how does that feel in your shoulder joint? And I've left it a little open so that I'm not leading the witness. But for someone who's like, well, I don't know, it doesn't really feel like anything, I'm just circling my arm. Can we get more specific about, does that feel uncomfortable or comfortable? So we give a more specific thing to pay attention to. That could be an option. We could change over to a different sense. When you circle your arm in your shoulder socket, what do you hear? Now we've got a different thing to look for. It's not a feel, it's a sense. Do you hear crackling or crunching, or is it smooth and quiet? So that could be an opportunity to then think about, well, okay, so if it's crackling or crunching, do you feel like a vibration or a clicking that goes along with that? And the answer to that might be no, but it might just be that it's helpful to provide something a little bit more specific about what a person might feel. So in that instance, then yeah, it might be helpful to offer up some parameters for what do you feel. So that's kind of one scenario. Depending on what you're doing, if you were on the floor or up against the wall or on a prop of some kind, then you could use that as the what do you feel. So if I come up here, so if you put the block against your belly so that you can feel the block rubbing against the bottom of your ribs, and cue the client to really actively make that motion happen. So literally feel or scratch the surface of your skin, do some really deliberate tactile stimulation. And then as you go into some extension, just a little upper back extension, are your ribs, is the block moving? Are your ribs pushing into the block so that the block is changing position? And if it is, could you change how you extend so that the block doesn't move? And then of course you can add cues on how that would happen, make it smaller, focus more on the upper spine. But giving somebody an external thing to feel is going to be helpful. So that's a place again where you can reframe how does that feel in a way that is accessible and gives something extra to latch onto. Sometimes it's really not helpful to ask the question, how does that feel? And there are a couple of different scenarios where that would be the case. One is I have a client where we were talking about gait, and we'd done some exercises and some movements, and we were exploring whether those things had changed how it felt to walk. And she said, you know what, I don't know. I don't feel this. I don't feel any difference in the way I walk. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So we're not going to try and combine how does that feel with a bigger gross motor action when there's just too much going on. And it's such a habitual, everybody walks. Most people walk at least a little bit every day. It's not an unusual activity. It's much easier to feel stuff in an unusual or a novel situation. Your brain is kind of more tuned to picking up those sensations and details. So if you're doing something where the client or the student is very familiar with the action and they don't tend to feel a lot, then maybe it becomes, oh, well, there's a mirror. Let's look and see if you see any difference. Or maybe you just leave it be and know that when we add novel movement, if we add diversity to movement, there's a pretty good chance that it's making a change of some kind, and we let it go. We don't always have to be getting an answer. Sometimes the non-answer is the answer that you need. Nothing that we've done has made this client feel uncomfortable. Nothing that we've done hurts. We're good. The other place where it's not helpful is if you are working with a client or a student who has experienced trauma and for whom focusing inward can be a trigger to anxiety, can be a trigger to that trauma. People who hold that trauma physically in their bodies, paying a lot of attention to it can be very destabilizing, unsettling, upregulating. And that's really important. That's important information for us to have, because you never know. You never know when somebody that you're working with may have trauma in their background. And so you need to be alert to that. If you are a, hey, how does that feel teacher, then you need to be aware of what you're feeling coming back from the client. Was the client all totally connected and having a great time? And when you started asking how do you feel questions and eliciting that internal focus, does the client stop making eye contact? Does the client stop talking? Does the client physically pull in or pull away? You know, those are all signs that somebody is ending up in a state of regulation that's not great. And so you want to be able to step back. The relationship with the client will dictate how you respond to that. If this is somebody that you don't know well, You could say, hey, it's looking to me like you're maybe less comfortable. Let's change gears. Don't call attention to it. Acknowledge that you've seen something is not going so well and step back. Give them options. Do you need some water? Do find a way to interrupt the process a little bit. If it's a client that you know well and you're aware that there's some trauma stuff, then you could say, hey, I think maybe I've gone in the wrong direction. Are you okay? Do you want to take a break? Should we go get some water? Do you feel like you want to do something super active? Would you like to get still and quiet and do something more restful? You can give them some options, and that puts the control and the agency back in their hands, which is a very positive thing typically. And this is where self-awareness skills, your own self-awareness skills, become really helpful. Do you feel that change in the energy that's coming at you from the client? Are you aware of what you're saying and when you're saying it and what the responses are to what you're saying? Right? Which all sounds like a whole lot of stuff to be thinking about when you're also trying to think of what exercises you're going to do next, and looking at the anatomical effect and looking at the mechanical effect and looking at the flow and what's the fascia doing. And like, there's all the stuff that we think about as teachers. But the primary thing I hope that we're all thinking about as teachers is, how is this working for the student? What is the outcome for the student? Is the student getting what they need? And so it doesn't really matter if my sort of favored approach as a teacher is this whole kind of how does this feel embodied way of doing the work. If that doesn't work for my client, if that doesn't work for the person I am with in the moment, it's my job, to put that away. There are other ways of creating focus, and there are other ways of determining whether something is working for somebody that are just as effective and that aren't necessarily, or that hopefully are not going to have any negative effect for the student or the client, right? We're a service business. We are there to serve the people who come to us to move. And so part of our task as teachers is to make sure that all of the skills and the strategies that we use to enhance a session, to enhance somebody's learning experience, that we don't become stuck in a rut that we do and say the same thing every time. We need to be aware. We need to be self-aware, and we need to be aware of the responses coming at us from other people to make sure that the strategies that we're using and the teaching skills we're making use of are effective and appropriate for everybody, for the person that we're working with. So that would be what I have to share with you today. And I can see that there's nobody here, so I'm going to say goodbye. If you have questions or comments, pop them in down below, and I will answer them later. Bye.